Hey everyone, I'm Mohammed Garba, the professor, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, right off the bat, I am here to discuss a massive question. What global and local historical events inspired Syl Cheney Coker's writing? Today, we're jumping straight into a historical investigation into the intense geopolitical forces that forged the art of Sierra Leone's master poet. It's a journey that's going to take us across continents, through centuries of history, and really, deep into the human soul.
And that brings us right to the core mystery we are unraveling today. We're looking at a man whose life and, honestly, his entire body of work sits right at the crossroads of some unimaginable tragedies. Let's explore exactly how things like world wars, the heavy legacy of slavery, and the bitter sting of political exile can actually serve as the crucible for brilliant, enduring literature.
Okay, let's dive into this. What you're seeing is the official seal of the West African Examinations Council. Decoding the history behind Cheney Coker's work is absolutely vital right now, especially for you literature students across West Africa. Why? Well, his magnificent poem, The Breast of the Sea, has actually been selected as essential reading for the WAEC Literature in English syllabus from 2026 all the way to 2030. So if you want to truly understand this poem, you can't just read the words on the page, you really have to understand the heavy history breathing right beneath them. To really understand the poet, we've got to understand his roots first. Cheney Coker coined the term Afro-Saxon to describe his own incredibly complex heritage as a Creole in Sierra Leone. The Creoles were descendants of repatriated Africans from all sorts of backgrounds, including Igbo roots, who ended up settling in Freetown. Growing up, he felt this deep, deep sense of alienation. He was mocked for his very dark skin, given the nickname Jollof Boy. And get this, he was even stigmatized just for being left-handed. He looked around and saw his society as culturally hybrid, kind of mimicking English customs, like literally drinking tea from an English teapot while completely ignoring their own ancestral memories. It was this profound feeling of being an outsider in his very own home that forced him on a lifelong, subterranean journey to truly figure out his identity.
And it's from that searching place that he writes. Just listen to these opening lines from The Breast of the Sea. After our bloody century, the sea will groan under its weight, somewhere between breasts and anus. Wow, it's incredibly powerful, right? But before we look at his local homeland, we need to zoom out. We really have to first look at the macro, global catastrophes that Cheney Coker is referencing right here.
When he writes about our bloody century, he is bringing down the sheer, devastating weight of the 20th century and really the centuries that built it. We are talking about the millions of bodies from the international conflicts of World War I and World War II. He also points directly to the subjugation of East Timor, a nation dominated by Japan, colonized by Portugal, and invaded by Indonesia. It serves as this massive symbol of imperialism. And underneath all of that, the original trauma, the transatlantic slave trade. The Middle Passage's cargoes, where innumerable emancipated Africans and slaves tragically lost their lives to the ocean. The race for international dominance literally sickened the world.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Cheney Coker uses the ocean as his ultimate metaphor. He sets up this fascinating dual nature of the sea. So on side A, you have the sea as the nurturing mother, represented by breasts, an alluvial river, offering this deep consolation for orphans. But then on side B, the sea is a mass grave. It's represented by the anus, filled with industrial toxins, the literal remains of the Titanic, and the countless dead of the Middle Passage. He's constantly contrasting nature's inherent desire to heal with humanity's unending capacity to destroy.
Looking at the actual text of the poem, we see exactly what the sea is being forced to swallow. It is completely overloaded with the literal and figurative debris of history. You've got Darwin's examinations, Noah's monologue, the recaptured coelacanth. Because of all these toxins, and we mean both literal industrial waste and the metaphorical toxins of human enmity, the poet notes that the sea's belly will not yield new islands. Meaning, despite these wars finally passing, it is just impossible to magically birth new islands of lasting peace out of all that destruction. Section 2. Sierra Leone's National Scars, zooming into local trauma. Okay, now we really must transition from that grand global stage down to the intensely specific local agony of Sierra Leone. This serves as the true emotional core of his work. To understand this local focus, let's look at this timeline. Back in the 1960s, Prime Minister Albert Margai began pushing to usher in a one-party state, which obviously sparked major opposition. But as the leadership transitioned over to Siaka Stevens, the political dissent only got worse. Stevens introduced severe political banditry and violence. He executed perceived opponents like Brigadier John Bangura and Ibrahim Taki, who was a political newspaper star that Cheney Coker deeply admired. This sheer political ineptitude ultimately paved the way for the absolute horror of the Sierra Leone Civil War, spanning from 1991 to 2002. It was these exact events and the complete loss of a civilized, tolerant society that sparked Cheney Coker's physical and spiritual alienation. Let's just take a moment here and really let these words sink in. But Sierra Leone won't be worth a raped woman's cry, despite her broken back, this shredded garment. The historical truth and the sheer human cost behind those lines are immensely heavy. The civil war in Sierra Leone between 1991 and 2002 brought unspeakable violence to the masses. The poet specifically highlights how rape was utilized as a major war crime and a deliberate strategy. It utterly devastated the women and children of his homeland, leaving the nation itself as a shredded garment, struggling to even stand with a broken back. The visible marks of this physical rapine are really matched only by the deep, lasting psychological trauma of the survivors. Section 3. The Burden of Exile, Alienation, and Art.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how witnessing this macro and micro violence from afar profoundly impacted Cheney Coker's personal life. Exile became not just a physical condition for him, but a real literary prop. He actually left Sierra Leone in his early 20s in the 1960s to study journalism over in the United States. And watching the horrors of the Stevens regime from afar, especially that execution of his childhood hero, it just ignited his poetic sensibility. His very first volume of poetry, Concerto for an Exile, back in 1973, was a direct, impassioned response to this political murder. Later on, as a novelist, because he lacked the integrated traditional background of some of his contemporaries, he actually invented this entirely fictional society called Malagueta just to process the trauma and the heritage of his people. His utter outrage at political banditry literally birthed his greatest works.
And returning to the poem, he uses a very specific, honestly surprising biological metaphor to describe the world that produced all this trauma. He calls it the fractured chela. Now, a chela is the pincer-like claw of a crustacean, like a crab. Think about it. If a crab's claw is broken, it can't forage, it can't survive, its condition really cannot be helped. Cheney Coker uses this to represent the intractable sickness of the 20th century. A world crippled by the pollutant effects of imperialism, colonialism, slavery, and war is exactly like that broken crab. It is suffering from a terminal blight.
Section 4. Healing History's Wounds. Can the sea wash itself clean?
So the crucial point here is, as we look at this immense devastation detailed in the source material, we have to ask, is recovery from this blight even possible for humanity? The poet leaves us with this final, echoing question. He addresses the sea, the Great Mother, the vast representation of all humanity, and asks if she has the balm to heal the literal and figurative wounds of her destitute children. Can time, nature, and literature truly wash away the scars of centuries of exploitation and violence? It's a powerful, provocative thought for sure, and one that forces us to deeply ponder our own history and really our shared future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I hope this deep dive into the crucible of Syl Cheney Coker's poetry has been as illuminating for you as it has been for me. Keep exploring and keep learning.